All right, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started. It's my pleasure to introduce you today, Sarah Holaday, who is the Director of Animal Care and Conservation at the Endangered Wolf Center. I have a little bit of a bio for Sarah. Her career at the center began 8 years ago as an animal keeper, and she transitioned to lead animal keeper, then animal curator, until finally reaching the Director of Animal Care and Conservation role at the Endangered Wolf Center in 2022. During this time, she completed her Master's in Business Administration with a concentration in nonprofit management at American Public University. Highlights in Sarah's career include fostering Mexican wolf pups in New Mexico, and introducing American red wolves into North Carolina. I hope we have pictures of all of that. Sarah sits on the Center's Safety Committee, DEAI Committee, and Sustainability Committee. Additionally, she sits on the Association of Zoos and Aquariums Species Survival Plan Management Team for maned wolves. Species survival plans help critically endangered species through research, education, conservation, and husbandry. Finally, Sarah sits on the Professional Development Committee for the St. Louis American Association of Zookeepers chapter. So yeah, really looking forward to your talk. Take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I'm the Director of Animal Care and Conservation at the Endangered Wolf Center. My career has been primarily focused on Mexican wolf and American red wolf conservation. But over the years, one wolf that I've cared about has stood out as having an exceptional history and contribution to his species, a male Mexican wolf named Mac. So tonight I will explain some of the wolf conservation techniques the center collaborates on through the lens of Mac's story. But first, let me give you a brief background. The Endangered Wolf Center was founded in 1971 by Marlin and Carol Perkins. Some of you may recognize Marlin's name since he was the host of Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom and the director of the St. Louis Zoo. The center focuses on the preservation of critically endangered canine species like American red wolves and Mexican wolves. We have been involved in their recovery programs since their inception and have had over 200 Mexican wolves and 60 red wolves born at the center. We also care for other species like African painted dogs, maned wolves, swift foxes, and fennec foxes. In addition to our conservation initiatives, we lead guided tours on-site as well as off-site educational programs to help people understand why wolves are such an important part of our ecosystem. Every wolf at the center is part of a recovery program and has the potential for release regardless of age or experience. Because of this, our animal care team takes every opportunity to reduce human presence by avoiding any interactions with our wolves, including hand feeding, training, and talking to them. They live in natural social groupings of family packs or breeding pairs, and we feed out whole prey items like deer, which are donated to us by local bow hunters. No, it's not going to work. Okay, this is a video of Mac's family pack. This is a multi-generational pack, so multiple litters feeding on a deer carcass in their habitat. Mexican wolves are the most genetically distinct subspecies of gray wolf. They are endemic to the southwestern portion of the United States and down into Mexico, and their diet mainly consists of elk. They were listed as endangered in 1976 and extinct in the wild by the late 1970s due to habitat loss and human-wildlife conflict. 7 wolves were caught and brought into human care to breed for reintroduction purposes, and they are the founders of both the current wild and human care populations. After being extinct in the United States for over 30 years, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service released the first adults in 1998 in Arizona and New Mexico. On the left, you can see the historical range in yellow, the area they are found in the United States in orange. The diagram on the right shows a close-up of the recovery area in the United States. Currently, at least 240 Mexican wolves are found in New Mexico and Arizona, with another 15 or so in Mexico. Within human care, there are about 350. When comparing these population numbers to those at the beginning of the program, it's easy to see that this program has been successful. Yet with only 7 founders, genetic diversity has always been a limiting factor and something that has been focused on throughout the program. Mac arrived at the center in 2014 with his brother Amigo, and they were some of the most genetically valuable males within the population. Many of their siblings were either raised and released into the wild or never bred successfully, making their contribution to the population even more critical. When I started as an animal keeper at the center in 2015, Mac was one of the first wolves that I cared for. One of my favorite memories of him was right after his first breeding season with his mate, Vera. We suspected that she was pregnant, but we weren't sure. Mac was just over a year old, and he was not always a fan of sharing his food like a good mate and provider should. After putting a deer in their habitat, we saw him proudly carrying a piece around with his chest puffed out. Vera, who was about half his size, walked right up to him and took that piece out of his mouth. Mac didn't even bother trying to take it back, and he let her eat that whole piece. That is when we knew that she was pregnant. These small moments are like a windows into a wolf's world for me. As we grow up, we learn from fables like Red Riding Hood that wolves are scary and evil. But the reality is that they are very much like us, family-oriented social creatures that are finding ways to survive in an ever-changing world. The center has collaborated with the St. Louis Zoo reproduction team and the Mexican Wolf SSP SAFE program for over 20 years to observe and record breeding behaviors for Mexican wolves and then later American red wolves. When the study began in 1998, the initial objective was to develop non-invasive ways to determine female reproductive cycles through the use of behavior observations, along with fecal collection and analysis for progesterone levels. Researchers hope to gain knowledge that would help with future artificial insemination efforts with frozen semen. This is the longest running Mexican wolf behavior study. Volunteers and staff sit quietly from a distance in hunting blinds for 2-hour shifts and record behaviors on an ethogram twice a day, every day, from the end of January through the end of March. They also record if a female defecated so that our animal care team can collect that fecal for hormone analysis. Recording these behaviors helps our staff better predict when litters will be born, since gestation is between 63 and 66 days. This prediction helps us with fostering, which is a technique we will discuss in more detail later. An example of a behavior that indicates breeding is close is when a breeding male sniff licks their mate's urine. This video is of a breeding pair of American red wolves, but shows the urine sniff lick behavior. Males will often follow this up with a urine markover, where they will urinate on top of the female's urine, letting all males in the area know that they are paired with this female. Breeding is successful if the pair enter into a copulatory lock, which can last anywhere from 1 to 45 minutes. For the 8 years Mac was in a breeding pair with Vera, both of them participated in this study, contributing to the base of knowledge about Mexican wolf breeding and helping set the stage for successful artificial inseminations. At the center, we have collaborated with the St. Louis Zoo and the AZA Reproductive Management Center to collect and bank semen from our male Mexican wolves since 1991. After some initial sporadic efforts at semen collection for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the project grew into a systematic program in 1994. Now, collection teams travel around the country to facilities in order to bank from as many males in the population as possible. Wolves only breed once a year, so banking can only be conducted during this time, which is about an 8-week period beginning at the end of January. In a typical year at the center, we collect for 2 to 3 days on anywhere from 8 to 10 males. This project has been ongoing for 20 years now, and the frozen ark is stored at the St. Louis Zoo. In his lifetime, Mac was banked 10 times, making him one of the most frequently collected males. Though 183 males have been banked, there are only a few samples from each, which makes it challenging to use in artificial insemination when the average insemination attempt requires anywhere from 4 to 6 straws twice per ovulatory cycle. With so few samples from each male, an attempt to artificially inseminate might mean losing those genetics forever if that male is deceased and the attempt fails. Artificial insemination in Mexican wolves is still in the experimental phase, and there has only been one pup born using frozen thawed semen so far. Mac raised that pup, Neshoba, whose biological father died shortly after he was born. Additionally, Mac's banked semen has been used in 4 artificial insemination attempts, and although none of those were successful, he has helped further the research and future success of this project. If we are able to effectively use the banked semen, males that never bred or were incredibly genetically valuable will be able to diversify the genetics of all current populations, thus increasing the long-term viability of the species. Fostering is a term used to describe when pups born in human care are transported to the recovery area and are placed into wild litters to be raised by wild parents. These wild parents treat those pups as their own, teaching them how to stay away from people, hunt, and maintain their territory. This technique has been very successful and has helped genetically diversify the wild population, as well as increase wild numbers. The center has had 40 pups fostered into the wild through this program since its beginning in 2016, the most out of any participating facility.
Today, we are doing something very exciting. We are fostering some Mexican wolf puppies out into the wild. So this morning, we're here at 4 a.m. going inside the den to do some health exams on our puppies, make sure they're healthy and ready for the journey. And we collected them, we brought them into our clinic, and now we're getting ready to fly on a plane to go release them into the wild. They make a huge impact for conservation. So Mexican wolves are critically endangered. Their genetics really benefit from having new ones added to the population. We're seeing this as a very successful method of helping to protect the species in the wild and keep their genetics strong. This is 2 puppies that we're adding to a population where the genetics aren't necessary. Well, right now we are at the airport getting ready to board our flight with our 2 critically endangered Mexican wolf pups, where we will take them to the recovery area for release into a wild pack there so that the pack can raise these puppies in the wild. We are so lucky to collaborate with Lighthawk, which is an organization that donates flights for conservation purposes. They are flying us out to the recovery area so that these puppies can go out into the wild.
Every conservation technique I am discussing tonight requires collaboration. Sorry. But fostering is especially extreme. With organizations like the Interagency Field Team that monitors the wild wolf population in litters, Lighthawk, an organization that donates private flights to transport pups to the recovery area, the Mexican Wolf Safe Program, which oversees the population in human care, and individual facilities like the Endangered Wolf Center, who care for and successfully breed Mexican wolves. To make it even more complicated, timing is everything. Wolves only give birth once per year between mid-April to the end of May. In order to foster, a pregnant female in human care must give birth within a week of a wild female, and the foster must be complete within 14 days old. Though all of these organizations are anticipating fostering and preparing, planning can't be solidified until we know that both litters are on the ground. Then there's a flurry of planning activity on each organization's end to perform their goals in order to complete a successful foster. Furthermore, other issues like wildfires and high winds have sometimes caused delays or last-minute changes to the plan. A typical foster day for my team begins in the dark around 4 a.m. We go into the center's den and pull pups, bring them to our on-site clinic, give them a quick exam, microchip them, tube feed them, and whiz them. Then they're loaded into a carrier, and at least 2 handlers are responsible for their care on what could be multiple car and plane rides to reach their final destination. This past year, it took 4 hours for one of our animal keepers to hike with the field team to the wild den. Once there, the wild pups are given an exam and microchipped as well. Then the foster pups are rubbed with dirt from the den, and all are placed back inside for mom to take care of. Remote trail cameras are placed nearby so that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service can continue to monitor the pack and keep track of the pups. In addition to Mac's 16 offspring that were fostered, 16 of his grandchildren and 6 of his great-grandchildren have been fostered into the wild. That is 38% of the total number of pups fostered into the wild. Today, we know that at least 2 of his daughters, 1 of his great-grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild have been collared and are still alive today. Mac raised an additional 4 pups that were not biologically his. One of these was Neshoba, the successful artificial insemination pup that I mentioned earlier. He's pictured in the top left. Neshoba was actually a singleton and didn't have any siblings. Because of this, he was doted on a little more by Vera and Mac. Pups usually leave the den at about 4 to 6 weeks of age. And I remember him poking his head out around this time frame and Vera actually blocking him with her body from leaving for at least another week. The next year, she had a huge litter of over 6 puppies, and she didn't even bother trying to do that again. Neshoba is now 6 years old. He still lives at the center, and he is with his own mate. This past spring, 2 of his own sons were fostered into the wild, which were featured in that foster video I showed you. Mac also adopted and raised 3 sons that were born in the wild, which are 3 of those puppies in the bottom photo. When U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service finds a litter of wild pups to foster into that is already very large, for example, 10 pups, they don't want to overwhelm that mom and dad and add too many mouths to feed. If this occurs, they will pull some of those wild pups out of that litter to give the remaining pups a better chance of survival. Sometimes that team is able to turn around and foster those wild pups into another wild litter, but sometimes they don't have one available. In that case, those wild pups actually come back to the mother in human care, and we place them in with her litter. We've had to do this a handful of times at the center and never have had a mother reject wild pups. These pups maintain gene flow between the wild and human care populations, and thus they have their own important role. Mac and his mate are likely the only wolves that have had 3 generations of offspring fostered into the wild during their lifetimes. Additionally, Mac not only fathered 25 pups in his own right, but successfully raised 4 others that are now able to contribute their genetics to the population. His contribution in regards to future generations has been enormous, and as his successors continue to breed, his legacy will continue to grow. These are some more cute photos of Mac's offspring and foster pups. The photo in the middle bottom row is a picture of Neshoba when he was a pup. Mac has always been an amazing father, and some of my favorite memories of him are on really hot summer days when he would actually take naps with them in the den. We have photos of our camera of him upside down, sleeping with 2 to 3 pups at a time in a giant heap. When the pups are little and they first come out at about 4 weeks old, Mac would actually lay flat on the ground like a pancake, and he would let them crawl all over him. It was adorable to watch him be so gentle and calm with them. Mac's last contribution before he passed away was arguably his biggest. We collaborated with organizations such as St. Louis Zoo, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Viagen, and Revive and Restore to collect and preserve Mac's somatic cells. Mac's genome is currently being sequenced from one of the samples and will be used as a reference for the entire species. It will allow researchers to identify genetic variation, assess population structure, and investigate evolutionary relationships. Furthermore, the other stored samples have the potential to be used in cloning research, which could further help genetically diversify the current population. Mac is one of 3 Mexican wolves that have had somatic tissue samples banked. Mac's contribution to the success and viability of his species has been enormous over the years. When he was born, no one could have possibly predicted the legacy he would have. With unique conservation techniques, such as breeding observations, fostering, semen collection, and biobanking, Mac's genetics are helping the present population and are saved for use in future conservation techniques. I've been in this field now for over 10 years, and working with animals has its extreme ups and downs. It gives you experiences that some only dream of, but it also has its challenges. Like when Mac passed away this year at the age of 10, twice the average lifespan of a wild wolf. Sometimes the difficult times have me wondering, does my work truly make an impact in conservation? Was the decision to dedicate my career to wolf recovery the right one? During these difficult times, Mac's story reminds me that my work matters. One individual, regardless of the species, can make a difference. Each of us can make a difference, and we need to keep pushing forward to help conserve this world, not only for our future generations, but also for Mac's.
Great question.
Yes, I have a question. So what happens to the mother at your center whose pups are taken to be fostered?
So she usually has at least one or two that stay with her,
Okay.
so she can maintain and keep those.
Okay, and do you perceive a difference? I mean, does she miss, two are taken and two are left? She misses.
We haven't noticed that they can count yet, so we haven't seen a difference in that. We've had a couple of rare times when a female will just naturally lose her litter, and we have seen a behavior difference in that, and she seems to mourn that loss. But if just a 2 or 4 are taken out of that litter and she still has some remaining, then she seems to be okay with that.
Very wonderful talk, thank you.
Thank you.
My question is, what are the circumstances that arise where you might have to bring wild pups back? Is it that, for instance, there were more wild pups in the litter than previously thought, or is there a scouting process that goes into choosing a particular litter to bring the foster pups? I'm just curious more on that.
Yeah, so fostering is really complicated and I could do a whole presentation on it, but there are many variables that the field team has to deal with. They don't actually go check that litter until the day of, because when a female wolf figures out that people have been around, she's going to move those puppies. So they have an idea based on the data from the GPS collar, but they don't officially know. So the first time they're seeing that litter is the day of the foster. And they usually have some cutoff that they've agreed upon. So usually it is 10 pups. So if there are 10 pups already in that litter and they're adding more, they will then pull some out to make up for that difference. And they tend to have a backup den and even 2 or 3 backup dens that they know that they can probably foster those remaining pups into. They've even done where we've fostered, let's say we had a really big litter one year, we had 9. And so they took 6 of our pups from that litter and they fostered into 2 wild litters simultaneously. But there's so many factors that go into that. They might not find the den, they might be wrong. The mother might not leave the den, and in which case they can't pull those puppies out. Their backup den might not work, they might not be able to access it. And so for multiple reasons, or they just might run out of time, it might get dark. So in that case, usually the pilot who's donating their time will wait until they say either we don't have any pups for you to take back, you can leave, or here, take 2 puppies back. And then they'll let us know and we'll have a team waiting at the airport to receive them.
Thanks for the talk. Very interesting. This might be way off the mark. What are some factors that determine or influence how likely it is for parents to foster new pups? So just thinking, on one hand, you might want to put a pup in a new genetically distinct background to increase diversity. But is there any relationship of sort of relatedness between the new pup and the fosters in terms of success in rearing the child?
So you're talking about the wild parents?
Yeah.
So now that there are there are more than 240 wolves, Mexican wolves out in the wild. They have many more dens to choose from. They tend to try to foster into dens with parents that have had a previous experience before, or that they know have been successful, but they are desperately trying to get as many out as possible to help with genetics, and then also to boost that population, the numbers. And so if they need to, depending on timing and what's going on, they'll foster into a new breeding pairs litter, and it's still been successful. Does that answer your question? Do you have a follow-up?
No, thank you.
Okay.
So you mentioned how the fosters are done to benefit the genetics of the population. I'm wondering how intensively the genetics have been monitored. Do you have data, or does the whole group have data on every wolf out there and some measure of its genetic diversity? And is that information used to say, oh, Mac and his partner are very different genetically from those ones in Cochise, Arizona? That's what we need to put them. So
Yeah. So the SAFE program manages the population that's within human care. The genetics and the background of every wolf that's within that population are recorded. And there's a software program that they use every year in a breeding and transfer planning meeting. And that's when they plan the number of breeding pairs they want based on the carrying capacity of the population in human care. They also plan and assume that a certain number of the litters that are born are available and will be fostered into the wild. So they try and plan for that as well. And then each individual's genetic uniqueness is determined by their mean kinship value. So that list is used to determine which pairs are going to be put together the next year. So when Mac and Vera were put together, they were a very, very good pair genetically for the population at the time. They actually still would have been today.
can I just follow up?
Yeah.
So is there actual genetic monitoring, DNA sampling, as opposed to using a pedigree to say, oh, they're second cousins or so on?
So they're banking, they are taking genetic information from the wild pups and from wild animals, and then they're figuring out their lineage based on those genetics. And then we bank and store samples of blood and other things from our wolves, depending on what we're doing in exam and stuff. So they have that information as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Kind of.
Thank you for your talk. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Never a bad day. So I actually have a slightly similar line of questioning. I was just, when you're putting the pairs together, like we had problems with like rejection of their partners.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you have a really nasty female or something. Just kind of, it's too aggressive. And also, are those like long-term stable over time, or will they have the same partner every year?
Yeah. So part of what goes into figuring out a breeding pair is their personality. Genetics, we can only do so much, and we can only put together individuals that we think genetically are a good pairing. Depending on their age and how many times we've attempted to put them in a breeding pair based on genetics, we might take personality into more a bigger factor later on. There is a female that we had when she first arrived at our facility. She had been in multiple different social groupings and wasn't successful and didn't get along very well with everybody. We put her with a breeding male who was young, inexperienced, didn't really know what he was doing, and he did not breed with her. The next year when we went to that meeting, we talked about her personality heavily, and we paired her with a male that had actually been pulled from the wild, and he had been an alpha male in the wild and had sired pups before, and they went on to have 4 litters. So.
And then just to follow up question to that, like in the wild, do you see like explicitly inbreeding avoidance amongst the kind of like descendant litters? Like, is there a worry that just kind of like brothers and sister pairs will end up pairing together even after a successful like parent selection? for genetic diversity, but like, is that something you're actively taking into account?
They do have to worry about it when the population is really small. So now the population is growing and we're bringing in new genetics with the fostering. It's not as much of an issue. Wolves, when they hit about 1-2 years of age, tend to disperse away from their family pack. They definitely understand who they're related to and who they grew up with. And they usually pair up with an unrelated individual. But it can happen if there aren't enough in the population.
Have you noticed any inbreeding effects such as what was seen in the Isle Royale wolves?
I have not, and I don't know of anything drastic. The population, even though it was founded by 7 individuals, was heavily managed for genetic viability. So they tend to have slightly smaller litters, but actually, I want to say within the past couple of years, we've seen really large litters as well. So I had heard some people suspect that those smaller litters were due to the genetic component, but I've seen they've had wild litters like this past year of 10, and we've had litters of 9, 10, 11, 12. So I haven't seen any major issues because of that.
And one last question. Wolves are a keystone species. Have you seen any effects on the environment from the growing population?
That's a good question. I don't have specifics on that answer. I feel like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would have to answer that question. I haven't heard anything about that. But it is a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for the talk and thank you so much for joining us. I spent a lot of time at Tyson, so I'm always like driving past y'all and the wolves howling. So on the kind of nonprofit side, I'm super curious about, I think kind of 2 questions is, I guess like, I imagine you use a lot of volunteers. There's like a lot of work. So I'm kind of wondering about like staff volunteering, kind of how y'all like navigate that. If there's like a lot of overturn, a lot of training you have to do. And then also just for like funding questions, I see a lot of tours coming through. So I'm just wondering if like, is that a big kind of source of like income or just like getting people to buy in and becoming donors? And yeah, I think you just kind of speak to the kind of more money and kind of like volunteer side. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, we do have volunteers. Our staff is anywhere from 20 to 25 people total. And then we have before the pandemic, we had about 60 really active volunteers, and then we had others as well. I would say it's decreased slightly after the pandemic, but we still have volunteers. We had them during the pandemic bringing us groceries and doing our laundry for us. So we definitely have a very devoted set of volunteers. They help with things like tours, events. We have some that help with animal care, especially in captures and other things as well. And then we do have tours every day except Tuesday. That's definitely a way that it helps us with revenue. We aren't funded by the government, even though all the animals that we have regarding wolves are owned by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And it helps us spread our mission and talk about it as well. Wolves can be really polarizing animals to discuss. And so just having people understand their true nature is kind of our mission.
Hey, thanks for the talk. I went to college in North Carolina, and a big conversation was the red wolves and sort of this conflict between farmers and red wolves and killer wolves. What has your experience been sort of balancing sort of wolf education with folks where you're releasing these animals, and sort of how you've seen that evolve over time?
I think that there is a much bigger push within the recovery areas now to collaborate and to have that discussion and to come to the table. Whereas when the Red Wolf program first started, that really wasn't done. Unfortunately, the Red Wolf program was one of the first large carnivore reintroduction programs. And so they learned a lot from that. But we are definitely seeing more effort and focus going into that. And for the Red Wolf program specifically, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is putting out highway signs along the highway that runs through that area, because there are a lot of hit by cars, and people are actually calling into the phone numbers on that saying they never even knew that red wolves were in the area. They have other organizations and nonprofits like Champions for Wildlife that are also helping with schools and helping educate children in the North Carolina area. They actually started a program with teachers where they could come out during the summers when they're not working, help discuss and talk about red wolves in the recovery area, and then they can take that information back to their classrooms during the school year. So they are doing a lot more, but traditionally they did not.
I've been asked to ask this question.
Okay.
The Northern Rocky Mountain region repopulated from 35 reintroduced wolves in 1995 and 1996 in Yellowstone. Why is it so much more difficult for Mexican gray wolves?
Yellowstone is a fully protected area and can support the carrying capacity, they think, about 100 animals. The Mexican wolf reintroduction area has 2 highways that border that area, and there are many ranchers and private landowners in that area. They have to work with those people, including that cultural bias that has been passed along from generation to generation, that wolves are not supposed to be on that landscape, that they are detrimental to cattle, and they do take cattle sometimes, but there are other ways to coexist, like fladry, guard dogs, etc., that people are starting to come back into and starting to learn about and use, but it is still a slow process.
Any more questions? All right. Well, we will be having our reception outside again. The weather is still nice this week, so we'll celebrate that. I'll also mention the postdocs are putting together the spring